Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back to the Raise.dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. My name is Joe, and I am your host for this afternoon session. There we go. I do all things community here at Raise.dev. And if you haven't tuned into the Hacktoberfest Help Desk before, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This show is all about getting you the answers you need around Hacktoberfest and the wider world of open source. We are here to answer your questions, whether they be big or whether they be small. So that could be things like, how do I make my start in open source? How do I find a good pull request, all the way through to, I have a specific issue, I have a specific problem, I'm getting this error message in this repository. How do I get out of that problem? We are here to help you with all of those kind of things. And you can submit any questions that you have about Hacktoberfest to our help desk at the raise.dev/Hacktoberfest site. If you submit a question there, we will review that question and find the right special guest to help you. And we'll send that question over to them. We'll let you know when your question will be answered live on the show. And at the end of the show, we'll send you a recording with your questions answered. Super easy. And that way you'll get all the help you need. to make your pull requests this Hacktoberfest. We're also covering some wider topics. We've been talking with guests so far about kind of good pull request practice, how to make sure your pull requests are greeted favorably by maintainers. We spoke to Wilhelm yesterday about kind of like turning a side project into a business. And today we've got a special guest that's going to be a little bit one of those. For those of you who weren't aware, Raise.dev actually launched this past week. We launched, this week's gone really far, Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday. I'm sure it was Tuesday. We launched relatively recently. And Raise.dev is a program to help you level up your careers. Essentially, we offer you coaching to help you get that new job, get your first job, get that promotion, finish a project, all those kind of things. And right now, while we're in early access, you can sign up for free at Raise.dev and get a kickoff session with one of our wonderful coaches. And we're very lucky today that we're going to be joined by one of our alums from what John calls the pilot program. So we're going to be hearing from Ching and go through her journey. So I will introduce and add Ching to the show. Please welcome Ching. Hey,
hi, I'm doing good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. So as you just heard, Ching is an alumni from Raise.dev and has been out in the world doing development. I think you left Raise over a year ago now, is that right?
Yeah.
A year ago? Awesome.
Over a year.
Would you like to tell folks a little bit about yourself, where you are now, what you're up to?
Right, so I'm currently a backend developer at The Skim. It's largely a newsletter for millennial women. I work on the back end of like mobile apps. So currently the Skim app, the newsletter app. And yeah, so that's what I've been doing. But I'm, yeah.
Right, cool. So when you say backend, like what kind of technologies are you working in, or what's the Skim use?
Right. So the backend is a Ruby on Rails, and yeah. So then the front end it's only on iOS, so Swift and Objective C. But I don't touch that.
Right, just on the Rails stack. Super cool. That makes a lot of sense for I guess reasons we'll get into to do with Raise and John Britton and those kind of things. So as I mentioned, you went through Raise.dev. I guess it'd be a good place to kind of start with that journey, and because you this was a career change for you, right? You had been in another field before coming into development.
Totally. Yeah, so before I was a software developer, I was an environmental engineer. That's what I got my bachelor's in and my master's. And I actually took a coding course in undergrad. It was part of general engineering, those courses. But it was like with MATLAB, and I hated it. I'm never going to code ever again. But after some years environmental engineering, I realized that industry is just really slow. It's a lot of regulation. It's working with government agencies. You could be working on a project your entire career, and from start to finish. And so things are they move a lot slower there. And
can I ask a really silly question? What does when you say environmental engineering, there's so many things that pop to mind. Like what falls under that discipline?
No, that's a good question. It's a lot of things. It's wastewater treatment. It could be air quality, all sorts of different things. I specifically worked on remediation. So that's specifically cleaning up soil and groundwater and air. So polluters, gas stations or chemical plants and stuff like that. And looking into that waste and how to clean it up.
Fascinating. Okay. So it sounds like super important work, but I can definitely see where the bureaucracy is gonna come into that. And also I imagine just the scale of some of those projects, there's a lot of considerations before you wade into a toxic waste.
A lot of stakeholders for sure.
Amazing. Cool. So the slowness was your main motivation for changing career?
Yeah. And so I took a JavaScript bootcamp prep course at Full Stack Academy, just to get a taste of things, and it's actually a lot of fun. So I enrolled in a full-time or in a full stack bootcamp that I did part-time while working. It was Thinkful, and it was online. And so I just did that part-time. It was self-paced while I was still working at my environmental engineering job.
Right.
And then shortly thereafter, got a job at Raise. So
that's awesome. Cool. So I have a couple of questions here. So this is a thing that's going to happen a lot. Advanced warning. I have my magic notepad so I can jump around without interrupting you. So when you were doing that part-time, what did that sounds super challenging to me, like juggling those two things. Like, what kind of hours were you doing on the boot camp while you were working?
Yeah, so I was able to actually get my work to let me reduce my hours. So I was working like
Amazing.
32 hours a week. And then I would try to put in like 20 hours a week on my boot camp stuff. So I had like, I also had a little magic notebook and I would write in like the hours every day that I like spent on the course and try to get to 20 every week. Of course, I didn't always get there, but yeah, it's like a way to hold myself accountable.
Cool, awesome. And then you said so. Obviously, you then from there went on to the job at Raise. How did that come about? We some of y'all might, if you were joining us from the other day, you might have heard John's side of the story. I'm always very intrigued about the other side of that story. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so John posted the job on his Twitter, and I found out about it through a Slack channel in my boot camp. It was like the jobs posting board. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like I get to like learn while I work on real projects. Like this is great. So I signed up for that. And like, of course, it's like the first time John was doing this and there wasn't like a website or anything. So it was a little bit like, is this a scam?
Just this random guy on Twitter being like, hey, I'm paying some devs to do this stuff.
It's like, it definitely like on our first day, we didn't even have an office. We actually met in the common area of my building, my apartment building. And the second day we moved into the office, but it was like very scrappy to start and a lot of like things up in the air. Like what is this thing actually? And I right when I received the job offer, I quit my job. I was going to anyway, to like just job search full time. But it's just like, oh, okay, I'll just launch into this. You know, if worst comes to worst and this guy doesn't pay me, I have a little bit of savings. So I was planning on writing that anyway. So
luckily John's not watching, so we can make jokes about him being shifty all we want.
So
absolutely. Well, otherwise I imagine you wouldn't have accepted to come on the show today. That would have been awesome. I guess to kind of put that in perspective, so for folks who aren't aware, so Raise.dev just launched, as I said in the intro, and we are essentially a coaching service. And this came about from, as Ching said, John, the founder, threw this thing out into the world. He wanted to work with an apprentice on a job and then had so many amazing applications for this thing that he decided to take them all and work out what it was. So during this like early chaos, like when you met in that like common area of your building, what had you been told you were doing at this point?
I think like at that point we didn't like the idea was to work on like client projects as like contractors, but we didn't have any clients at that point. It was just he just had the developers. So it's kind of like, I guess we'll just sort of like classroom style learn some things until he gets clients. Like he showed us how to set up our like computers with like development environments and use like dot files. And
that's what I was about to ask about that.
So that was really cool, just like learning just sort of more like how to like create your development environment to work best for you. And like it's not really stuff they teach in boot camp.
So actually I would love to like take a detour on this point, because I think this is I mean, as you just said, it's not something they teach in boot camp. It's definitely been something that in my experience, they also don't teach it in like computer science course at university, from what I experienced anyway. So I think it's something that a lot of people end up kind of like picking up slowly by force, when like, you know, they start using a certain project which requires a certain package management solution that requires certain project or system-wide config, and then they start need to caring about these things. So like, what was that treading into? Okay, first of all, let's start with like, what is a dot file? What does that mean?
So it's just like this collection of like the like programs that you would use and to help like start you up. So like on a fresh machine, you just like like pull in like all the different programs and software you use and like install that automatically and like link them to where they need to go. So it's like a really way to just really good way to just get started immediately. And the way we did that was we like backed up our computers
Right.
on hard drives, and then we just like started on computers from the factory settings and went from there.
Awesome. And what kind of like dev tools? I mean, I imagine this has changed a lot over like as you've moved from job and grown in experience. But like, what kind of dev tools are you or things are you setting up in your dot files?
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely like my my code developer or code development environment.
Cool.
Yeah. So like the so that's Visual Studio Code, and then having other stuff like there's this one little like command line tool that I like to use called TLDR, and it just yeah, it's like help but like shortened.
Oh, interesting. So like it'll give you like a too long didn't read summary of like man pages and stuff.
Yeah,
kind of
exactly. Yeah, and show you like 5 like maybe like
this.
yeah, show you like 5 like easy like commonly used commands with that.
Yeah.
So I'll just like put that in if I'm like using like a new command line tool or something, and it'll just like really easily explain to me what's happening.
Cool. Do you do that whole thing that all the cool kids do where they put their like dot files on their GitHub for people to find?
Oh yeah, I do have mine on my GitHub. I haven't updated it in a while.
I did that once, like when I first got into dot files. I was like, yeah, this whole idea of sharing them is great. And then like quickly realized how my dot files just fell into disrepair and chaos real quick, and I haven't pushed them ever since.
Yeah. Another good thing is like settings on different like settings on my Visual Studio Code, like settings on like I use this thing called Spectacle to like manage my windows, and I didn't realize this, but I was like using that directly from my boyfriend, and he had like manually set up all these settings. So the default Spectacle settings I wasn't used to.
Well, what you always use. Okay.
Yeah. And then so I had to like port those manual settings over, and then like I save that in my dot files too, so I could always like not have to relearn it.
That's so funny. Actually, we had dot files came up in a show last night actually with Swift from MLH, and he had this thing where he said like his school, his like university club had a mantra which was thou shall not inflict your dot files on someone else, and part of the reason was because like you learn things that aren't the defaults, so when you have to like when you don't have it, you're like, oh, I don't know how to get to what I had before. So it's so funny. It's really good. Also, I didn't know about it looks like it's not maintained anymore. That's a shame.
Man,
I'll move to rectangle. Okay, good to know. This is awesome. I didn't know about this project. That's super cool. Rad. So that first day, so you set up your dot files, and then you jumped into learning some stuff. Like what kind of stuff? I mean, I'm assuming Ruby on Rails because that's John. But like, what kind of stuff were you doing?
We dove a little bit more into just sort of like how computers work, like
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, just like more of like like what an operating system is, and like how like just like more of the nitty gritty of like that kind of stuff, and like how like the internet works and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. Like it's not just like learning a specific language, it's like learning more like computer science fundamentals that we don't really get to learn in boot camp because we're just like breezing through trying to be like work ready.
Right. So in the boot camp, like I guess the things when you say like breezing through and trying to be work ready, I guess you're learning like 2 very particular frameworks, and like the frameworks that people are currently hiring for, and like how to use them. Okay, fascinating. So I guess it was at that initial learning period, and then at some point clients started to trickle in. Do you remember what your first project was?
Yeah, so it was this nonprofit run by a friend of John's called Lemon Tree. It was it's like a Blue Apron or those like meal delivery kit services, but it's for like low income people, and so it's the meals are like really cheap. I think they're like $2 a meal.
Wow.
And so like we were helping to like better organize like the label printing and like the ordering system and just make that better.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. And was that so? I guess they came to you with like an existing tech stack and application that you were working on. Was that like how was that kind of going from this like bootcamp learning through this like computer science fundamentals crash course of John through to jumping into someone else's stack? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so like John had you know, a lot of knowledge about like Ruby and Rails, and actually at that point when they first like brought us onto the project, it was on Sinatra.
Cool.
But so like John would walk us through the like kind of like an onboarding of the repo and show us like, oh, what's what, what's where, and that was like really helpful just to get started, because like just dropping into something new, it's like kind of like, where do I even start?
For sure.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we're doing this thing where when we talk about a particular technology, we go on a detour and briefly explore that. Can you run us through the differences? So we mentioned like Rails and Sinatra there. Like what are the differences between those two things? Like when would you use one and when would you use the other, I guess?
I think Sinatra is like a lot simpler and doesn't have as much of the like building things that Rails provides, like when you start. And yeah, I think, yeah, I'm actually not quite sure, because like John did a lot of the moving from moving the project from Sinatra to Rails. But yeah, I think my understanding is like Sinatra is like much simpler, and like that's why they started with that. And then once like, you know, we had more complex requirements, that's when like migrated to Rails.
Yeah. I am not a Ruby dev, as anyone who's watching who knows me knows, but I hear Rails people say a lot, what is it? Configuration over convention, or vice versa, or maybe it's convention over configuration. One of the two. Rails does a lot of things for you, is all I know.
Yeah, there's a lot of Rails magic.
Yeah, Rails magic. Yeah, I've heard that phrase a lot as well. Okay, fascinating. So that, like, jumping into that project, I guess at that point, all of you who are on the program were kind of on that one project together and like pair programming with each other and John on that.
Yeah, we pair program all the time. Right. With John and also the other coach, Chris. He has a lot of knowledge on Rails and too. So like, you know, we work together with both of them. And there just be instances where like we're pairing with like one of them, like, you know, individually, and then there's like some concept that you know, like John or Chris are like, oh, okay, this is like good to share with the rest of the group. And then they'll just like break out into like teaching class mode. And just basically like go through like, oh, this is why like it doesn't work this way or it works that way. So yeah.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's definitely like an environment that's like so unique, because when you're actually working at a job, you just like don't really have the time to just like sit down and be like, okay, let's all learn this.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess there's like, you get the occasional kind of like brown bags or learning and development sessions, but it's not quite the like, proactive learning environment.
It's not like spontaneous like that.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, cool. So how long so you're working on that project for a while, like what came next? Like what was so how long were you at Raise in total? Was it about a year?
Six months.
6 months. Cool. Awesome. So how long were you working on Lemon Tree?
I think maybe in the first month or so, and then after that we started getting more clients. We got another project that I started working more heavily on. It was RevOps, a startup in San Francisco, started also by a friend of John's. And I worked specifically on like this, they have like sales agreements that they like streamline for businesses. And one of the things, I guess, like legal departments really like to have those agreements and contracts in Microsoft Office document. And so
I pulled a face a minute ago because I remember you telling me about this. And we're gonna have to spend some time on this, because this Microsoft Docs madness is fascinating. So sorry, I interrupted as well.
Yeah. It's like really interesting that like legal departments are just really like we have to have stuff in docx. And so, you know, like you could be able to build like a contract agreement on on their website in HTML, and then have to export it to docx so that like, you know, legal departments could review it and redline and stuff. So I worked on that portion of being able to export it to docx. Yeah.
And I imagine that must have had some real weird, hairy challenges, like working on a web app, which I imagine there's some kind of form that they're editing their legal documents in, and then exporting to what is what has been for a lot of his life a very kind of like fast changing proprietary format. I imagine there was some difficult problems to solve with that.
Yeah, I think so. On the web, it's like formatted with CSS, and like, tables are in a certain way, and then like porting that over to Microsoft Word was kind of like, it's not one-to-one. Like, it would be like, oh, this table looks great on the web, and now it's like all screwed up on Microsoft.
Oh, no.
And then like trying to get to the bottom of like, why is that happening? And like, oh, like Word actually recognizes this a different way, or like doesn't recognize this. And like something as simple as like the like logo of a company on the web, like, it's like smart, like it changes as you like change the browser window, but on Word, like it needs to be a set size. And so like, there are challenges like that, and like tables breaking across pages, because there's no such thing as like pages, like
page it's just in the scroll,
yeah. And then on Microsoft Word, being able to like, on the next page, like still have the like the header row and stuff like that. Like,
so if it broke across the page, you'd have to like catch that and repeat the heading.
Wow. So there's like things like that that you have to consider when converting from HTML. So
wow, super cool. So I want to move on a little bit from like your time at Raise.dev onto like when you first started to transition into the full-time workplace. There's a couple of topics here that we get asked about a lot, and I think are really relevant for Hacktoberfest, because for a lot of people, they hear, and for example, this was the case in our stream this morning, they hear about open source and particularly Hacktoberfest as like being an entry to open source, but they hear about open source as something that's positive to your career, and having it on your CV will help you get a dev job and that kind of thing. So I think it'd be nice for us to talk about that kind of part, that like getting your first dev job and doing the tricky bits like the negotiation and working out like what you want to do and what teams you want to work on and stuff. So I guess you eventually left Raise.dev, and we as we spoke, that was for the skim. What was that process like? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, so the whole time I was job searching and interviewing, I was very open with John and Chris, the coaches, and they were very supportive. Like whenever I went through, interview, they would help coach me, before I do like practice rounds. And then afterwards we would go through like, oh, these were the technical questions asked. This is how I answered, like how, and it would be like a little exercise for everyone else.
So,
like,
so those practice rounds were like actual like technical interview practices. They'd have you do whiteboard drills.
No, not that intense. But I think after it, like it would be a like challenge for everybody else. Like, oh, like how would you have answered this question? Or it's just like good practice. And then once I got the job at the Skim, they I actually like went through my offer with John, and he was like, oh, you should negotiate, and like try to get like telling me like how I could negotiate. And I was like, well, actually like this is like more than I initially asked for, so I don't know if I can. And he was like, no, you have to like like it's like very common for women to not negotiate the offers, and they just like start off at a lower place than
whatever they give them.
And he was like, so it's really important that you do it. And I was like, okay. And then he helped me like craft out like the reasoning, and email them back, and so like, and it worked pretty well. So
nice, cool. That's good. I was hoping they would think about like, who told you to write this email? This is garbage. So they you got the extra you asked for. What kind of I guess what kind of percentage bump was that on what they'd initially offered?
Let me do.
Don't worry, you have to do math. Just that's fine.
Yeah, like 10%.
Nice. That's a huge chunk over the course of your time at a company. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, so that's
no, sorry, 5%.
Oh, that's still pretty good. Yeah. So what kind of like, so in that, I know it's a while ago, so it might be I try to remember, but like what kind of, how did you approach it? So like actually doing that negotiation, I know is like really hard for people, and actually even framing that. There's always like this, I think this fear that people have that like they come into an offer knowing that negotiation is part of this thing, and knowing that both sides expect to negotiate, but still at the same time having that fear that this is something they shouldn't do, and like really worrying about tone and approaching it. Like how did you go about like actually putting this back to them?
Yeah. I think like one of the things that's like an irrational fear is like, oh, they're going to say like I'm, being ridiculous and take back the offer. But that's actually like really rare. Like they put in the effort to interview too and spend the time, and just like reminding myself that that's the case is really key. And also, I had at that point, like I didn't get like a formal offer, but I knew that RevOps, the other client I was working for, was interested. And so I sort of like talked about that. And like you didn't have to get into specifics of like,
but just saying I have other offers is
like I have other options, and like, just basically framing it that way. I think really helped me get a leg up in that.
That's awesome. So I guess take a step back a little bit. How did you kind of get to this point where you were interviewing at the Skim? Like when you were looking for the job for jobs, like what were you looking for anything in particular? Any kind of companies? Like how were you driving your job search?
Honestly, like I've only found the Skim because of like this meetup that John had taken all of us to. It was a Dev 2 meetup, and it was being held at the Skim headquarters. And I like subscribed to their newsletter and read it every day. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize this place has developers too. Like that makes sense. But
for sure, it's like one of those funny things where just like I don't want to say the famous phrase, but the whole like tech is eating the world thing. Like you don't realize what companies have software developers, right?
Right. Not just tech companies.
Yeah.
So, I went to that and I chatted with some of the developers afterwards, and I was like, oh, this is like a really cool place to work. And so like I applied, through that, and got a referral from one of the people that I met there. And so it was just cool to be like, oh, this is a place like where I actually use the product and be great to work here. So yeah.
That's awesome. Super cool. So after you like I guess left Raise.dev and joined the Skim, so that was like your this was your first dev job at that point after environment. Well, I mean, aside from Raise.dev, but I mean like your first like
full-time.
I guess not being proactively mentored dev job.
Yeah.
How was that? How was that transition?
Yeah, it was. It like thankfully they were also Ruby on Rails, so I like everything that I learned from John was really helpful here. Because I didn't learn Ruby on Rails in my bootcamp, it was like JavaScript Node, and so that was really helpful. To get me started. Like the dot files really helped because I was able to set up my computer really easily and like get all the like customizations that I'm used to. And then it's definitely different in the sense that like in like a real job, it's like more like deadline driven, and like there's more like other stakeholders, like other departments that you have to interface with and understand the needs of. And so I think from like John and Chris like had really shielded us from like the pressures of like deadlines during like Raise.dev. Like they would manage like the client and like manage those expectations and stuff. But when you're at a real job, it's like, oh,
I'm like managing those now.
It's like just the people you work with. So yeah, it's definitely different. But it was really cool.
Nice, that's awesome. And did you stay in touch with Raise.dev like while you were still there?
Yeah. We have a alumni Slack channel. So I peep in there every once in a while and see what the updates are.
Wonderful, super cool. Well, thank you for running us through that journey. I like how this has now been. So as we said, it's about a year since you left Raise.dev. How are you feeling, I guess, about like being in this industry and making that career change? I guess the bureaucracy is less.
No, it's definitely satisfying to like work on stuff and then like see it in action, like almost immediately. So that is really satisfying. Just being able to like, of course, like when bugs come up, it's like, oh my God, really scary. But like, once you fix them, it's like, Yeah.
So I guess my next set of questions, like as someone who has just like entered this industry, like do you have plans about what's next, where you wanna go? I guess it's like a huge change, moving career, and then there's like it's like that's done. So now it's like a lot of other decisions to make, I guess.
Yeah. So like my first job, I just wanted it to be a place where I could get experience and
Right.
just learn. I wasn't really caring about the industry. But then started my job search a couple months back and started looking more into, like healthcare is something that I wanted to go more into, especially in like this climate.
Right.
And I think there's a lot that can be improved on in the healthcare space.
Yeah.
So I started like interviewing at places there, and actually am starting my new job on Monday.
Oh, congrats.
So,
That's amazing.
thank you.
That's super cool. And how is so this is again something, oh god, this leads me into a whole rabbit hole of things. So like folks who are watching, who are currently like in a job and thinking about changing, one of the things I've heard from like a lot of devs in that position is it can be a struggle to juggle being in a job and starting to change and having to find times for interviews and actually doing the job search. Because when you don't have a job, it's much easier to fire off like 50 applications and do all those interviews when you've got full 3 days. How did you manage that transition?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I feel that's my catchphrase for the episode is, how did you manage that transition?
That's a good one. I think it was definitely challenging, like having a full-time job and then like trying to balance this. I think it's like a little bit easier given that everybody's remote, before the pandemic.
You don't have an excuse to leave the office.
Yeah. Another doctor's appointment. So that was like easier to do, but definitely felt overwhelming at times, just having to prepare for interviews. Like one thing is like the interview process for a developer is so much harder than the interview process for
it goes on for a long time.
Yeah. So many different like interviews and on-sites with meeting with different people, and just the process of like, I had to like bust out the cracking the coding interview book again and like sort of like leaf through that. It's really boring, but I did push myself through it. And like doing some more like coding challenges online through, HackerRank and stuff like that. But ultimately it was just like, some places I interviewed at that I didn't necessarily want to go to. I was just like, this is just like good experience, and it'll like make me less jittery before like my first interview at a place that I really do want to work at.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think one thing that, I realize in hindsight I could have done more of is like just say no more often. Like I think if you're in a position where you're balancing a full-time job, and it's not someplace where you're like, oh my God, I have to get out right now. Like you have that luxury of being able to like, oh, okay, let me just like space this out a little bit better and not, just like say yes to everything that comes to me and like have a bunch of interviews.
Right. Amazing. Cool. So what was the, oh God, this might bring traumatic memories. What was can you tell us about any of like the interviews you had, like any like particularly tricky questions come to mind or fun questions?
Yeah, I think this questions that were a little bit more like theoretical, like stuff from like the cracking the coding interview. Those were ones that I struggled more with, just because they're not like what I do in the day to day. Exercises where I'm like, building something like an API for something, or like fixing existing code or whatever, like that stuff I was like much more comfortable with because that's like what I do day to day anyway. So just like remembering like algorithms and their different like big O times and run times and like all this stuff like
reversing linked lists and this
all that sort of stuff, and like recursion, whatever, and like all that kind of stuff is like harder for me to like remember because it's also like I'm sure there's like more in depth on study of that stuff if you have like a computer science degree, but as a bootcamp grad I didn't have a lot of exposure to that, and so like it's just like reading it and trying to like memorize it, so that was harder for me.
Interesting. Cool. And I guess through to like getting this new offer, there's a couple of interesting things there. So like we hear, I think the tech industry as a whole is one that is far better at rewarding people during a job change than it is through promotion. Like I hear time and again that people struggle to advance their careers or to get a raise while staying at a company, but when they change company, it happens relatively easily. I guess, has that been something in your experience that like you were able to in making this change, you felt that like they recognized your experience thus far a little bit more than maybe you would have been able to get internally in like the old job?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think also like as a special circumstance, you know, the pandemic has a lot of companies putting on like promotion freezes, and that was definitely the case for my company. And so like there's definitely like that added aspect. But I think in general, like companies that are and so like this is my like first job out of you know outside of Raise.dev, but like I think my understanding is because it's largely a media organization, it's less aware of like sort of the impact that tech has, and you know so like the individual work that people in the tech work do and engineers do is a little bit less seen. Like we're less visible. We're not, you know, we're behind the scenes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so that makes it a little bit harder to move up that way. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. And it's also, I guess, competing for a very different like engineer pool in that there's like to again use a very cringy industry acronym, like the FANG companies are hyper aware and like competing with on a very particular kind of basis of package, right? Whereas like when you get to places that are dipping their toes into the into software development, they're going to be approaching it from their existing structures. Cool. That's it. Do you know what technology stack the new place works in? Is it also Rails?
Yeah, it's also Rails.
So many Rails companies. Everyone, I didn't realize there was this many I guess fringe, like things on the fringes of technology that were doing it. That's super neat.
Yeah, I think it's a good tech stack for startups. It's just easy to get started and running.
Yeah, a lot of that config over whichever. I'm gonna have to look up which way around this is because I'm gonna make myself sound like an idiot every time I talk about Rails now. It's convention over configuration. I'm so sorry if you're listening, John. It's gotta be that way around. Yes, convention over configuration. Boom. There we go. Right. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think that's been I think super useful because as I said, I wanted to try and make sure that on this show we get a little bit of that, like just beyond focusing on open source in a moment and kind of talking about kind of career trajectories for devs as a whole. But I want to kind of get into a little bit of like I guess your day-to-day practice, because I know that some of the things that like Raise.dev that like some of the development practices that y'all were doing every day. So like John, for example, I know is a big fan of like chat ops and of like the Git flow. So I guess that would be a great place to start. Like did you, when you were developing at Raise.dev, did you use any particular development practice? Do you remember like pick up any particular development practices that you would use in on like those client projects?
I pick up any development practices.
So I guess like the one that most jumps to mind, which I think is going to be really relevant for that Oktoberfest crowd, is like the Git flow and the notion of like starting with a pull request early. I think is something that we've picked up a little bit here. So there's a little bit of a thing going on with Oktoberfest at the moment where there is some spam PRs coming in from a particular project, and a lot of people are getting feedback on their PRs that they're not necessarily ready to act on. And one of the things that I've seen from some of the Raise.dev PRs onto the site and that kind of thing is, or like what we see in industry is like Raise PRs, right? Raise PRs. Pull requests are actually like the start of the journey, right? Like you open a pull request to request review and then you get feedback and that kind of thing on there.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess like I've now just like gone on my own tangent, but to bring that back to a question, like when you approach like contributing some code to what is your approach to contributing some code to a repository, I guess would be how I leave that.
Yeah, I think having like a good sense of like how Git works and like, you know, using the different tools to make sure that, you know, you have like clean commits and that they like, it makes sense in a tangential, in like a sequence. And of course, like a pull request is like, it's not like a polished finished product. It's the start of a conversation. So like there, you know, like I am not afraid to like be like, oh, okay, well, I did this thing this way, but I'm not sure if that's right. Like, you know, open the conversation on that, get feedback, solicit like, you know, opinions on the right way to do stuff. And I mean, there is a right way, but there could always be like, oh, there's a better way to do that. Or here's
there are preferred ways on a project by project basis.
Yeah. And so, yeah, just pointing out to the reviewer, like, here's like some things that, you know, I especially want looked at. And making that clear, adding any, like, I always like in my PRs add like more context, like, oh, this is like what it does, and like here's like links to like resources that I used or whatnot, to like guide those decisions. And I think those are really helpful to have like more descriptive PRs.
Right. Is there any like resources that you found especially helpful from that front?
For opening PRs,
or like making descriptive PRs, I guess. I don't know if that's
I think like different, I know like different repos have like their own like guidelines for contributing, and
like
a lot
contributing.md and that kind of thing.
And a lot of those like have some good ideas about like you know, explain like all the different things in this PR, like what it does and what it changes, and how to test it, or like how to see if it works, stuff like that. And just like walking people through that, all of that like helps the reviewer also to like know what to look at and how to check it out.
Awesome, cool. So another thing I wanted to talk about, so obviously like when you went through Raise, it was like kind of a co-located program, and now with COVID and wanting to reach more people and help more people, it's going to be like an online via calls program with like check-ins with coaches. But one of the things that I think is going to be a big kind of like line between the two is that pair programming is still like going to be like a really important thing in the new Raise.dev. And so you mentioned doing a little bit of pair programming. Well, from what I've heard, quite a lot of pair programming in the old Raise.dev. Can you tell us a little bit about your pair programming experiences? So pair programming is something that I think, especially a lot of people coming into development from different backgrounds, like won't have done a lot of. It's not something, for example, that like it came up maybe like tangentially in like my university degree when we were talking about agile and all that kind of stuff, but it's not like a practice that is taught. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about pair programming and what you think is like valuable about it.
Yeah, I think it's like really good, especially if you're stuck on a problem, to sort of pair program with someone else and get a different set of eyes. Because you could be like looking at something and being like, well, all of these parts work, so like why doesn't the whole thing work? And they can come in and be like, really quickly be like, oh, actually, like that part, like try that again. And I think just having like we did this a lot at Raise. We would use like tuple, I think, where you could like screen share and the other person could actually like type into your screen also. But even if you don't have that, just having like the clear, the line numbers at the end, so people can be like, oh, actually on this line or that line.
Right. So you have to point people to what you're talking about.
And having like I think it's different. Pair programming in person, like physically, having like two people sharing the same computer versus like someone presenting and it's virtual. But yeah, having a like, when it's like virtual, like having a good sense of like the roles that each person is playing. So that
what kind of role? What do you mean by roles?
Yeah, so like I think it's when you're presenting, or like when you're doing a virtual pair program, it's easy for one person to just like sort of do both the like driving and the like directing or whatever it's called, it's easy to fall into that because that's just like how we work normally. But taking a more passive role as the driver, and letting the other person talk through like, this is what we should explore, or like that's a little bit harder to do than in person, but it's like really important so that like both people sort of like on the same footing and have as much like I guess like sway in the conversation.
Right. Amazing. Awesome. Super cool. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think I have a friend who is constantly trying to rope me into a pair programming session, and I think one of the things that I've always really struggled with that is like this, which is probably like a totally unfair way to feel, but like the idea of like failing in front of this other person watching me code, you know what I mean? Like getting stuck on like, hey, I don't know what method I'm calling here. I don't know the syntax for this. Yeah. And for some reason that like scares me so irrationally. Like, did you ever have any of like, how was your first like pair programming experience? Did you ever have any of those experiences, or was it like all very, I guess, coming from where you came into it, very, I don't know, was that something you experienced or have dealt with?
Yeah, I think like it can be, you know, it can, I definitely felt like really silly at some points, being like, I like can't find the missing end statement to this one like method, or it's I think like when you're pair programming, even like sharing your screen, it's like easier to just be like. It's for some reason it's like you become that person that's like just a little bit dumber and like what's going on. Maybe it's like being in the spotlight or something, but like that definitely happens. But like it also like happens the other way around. If someone's sharing their screen and I see what they're up to, and like they'll be like, oh, like this like simple thing, or like typos. So I think it like happens to everyone, and just like understanding that, and like being aware of that is like just really key. So
awesome, super cool. So I was going to quickly check whether we had any relevant questions in chat or the help desk. Just a reminder, folks, if you do have any questions for Ching specifically on her experiences, or for anything about Hacktoberfest, you can throw it into the chat. We are happy to answer things as we go along. I don't know if we've got anything. Oh, no. Our form submission service is down. Type form is down, so I can't check the help desk. Hug ops to type form. That's incredible. Oh, no, here it goes. Refresh now. Wonderful. So this is... we actually had a new question just before you came on, actually, about 3 p.m. CEST, which I think is probably actually going to be pretty key to this. And it's a pretty simple question. It's, I don't know where to start. I'm a novice. So I guess like it'd be great to get to chat this out and say, like, if you were today going to go find an open source project that you wanted to contribute to, where would you start?
Yeah, I think some resources when I was first looking up, are there. I think there's even like websites that are like, oh, good repos for like people to start in. There's also that like GitHub tag that's like a
good first issue.
Yeah, good first issue. Yeah, that's a good one. Or Help Wanted, like ones that show like, oh, there's actually like need for this, and people want help with that. So like those are good places to start. But I think me personally, like the best way that I've gotten involved in open source, and I haven't done that much, but it's just like if I'm using packages or gems or things in my own development, then I naturally just know more about them instead of jumping into like a new repo and be like, how does this work? Like, how do I figure out how to contribute? And just by like using existing open source stuff, I can be like, okay, well, like I know how this thing works, and I know like what the features are, and what's important for me to use. And so, I've like, that's been like the main way that I've contributed has been like, this part needs to work and it doesn't work, or like I need this thing to happen, and I'll just go in and I'll see like, oh, is there like an issue for that already? Is there a PR for that already? And a lot of times like there is, and you just have to like jump in and be like, well, like, what's happening here? Like, can I help?
Yeah.
Like, and just like move things along and just like in self-interest. And sometimes it'll actually be like, oh, there was a PR for this, but the maintainers were like, that's actually not within the scope of this. So we're not going to do that. And you're like, okay, all right. So like, that's, not what the purpose of this is.
Right.
So yeah, so I think that's like the easiest way for like me to get started. I think if you're new and you just like, just work on something that like of your own interest and use different tools, open source tools, and start to get a feel for what they're like instead of just like jumping in and being like, oh, like how do I just immediately contribute? That's really helpful.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's really great advice. We had a chat this morning about some of like a big topic that's been going on Dev Twitter this last couple of days has been like the screenshot going around of a particular interaction in the repo where someone added a feature to a project and the maintainer said like, basically this feature is scope creep. This isn't what we're trying to do. Like we appreciate that you want it, but it's not something that we want in the project. So that perspective of like, hey, if you use the project, you kind of know what's in scope for it and like whether something is going to be a welcome contribution. I think that's really great advice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I hope that we'll get that over to that question asker. I think that's a wonderful thing. Cool. So yeah, we're coming up close on the hour. I guess, is there any final advice you'd like to leave either new contributors with or job searchers with, or anyone who's about to go through Raise.dev, avoid John, that kind of thing? Any final advice you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I think in my experience, the like developer community has been really welcoming. I think on stuff that I've done with open source, it's like very scary to like put your code out there and be like, look at this. But just I think people are really welcoming and appreciate the contributions, and so like say like don't be scared. And also like on the job search front, I think like it's a tough market out there. It's
especially now.
Yeah, especially now. I think for newbies to development, it's like it can be especially hard. Like, right now, definitely a lot of companies like that I was like trying to talk to were like, we're, only hiring like really senior people or like, stuff like that, or like we're not even hiring. So that can just be really hard. And I think you just need to be reminded that like it's not necessarily a reflection on you, and people, companies a lot of times take years of experience as like an indicator of your like ability to perform, and it's not a perfect one-to-one ratio. So but it's like just the easiest way that companies can suss out like ability, but it's not necessarily indicative of your own like qualifications or anything.
I think that's a really great point. I think it's I'm very much on the side of like hiring is broken, and just like we as an industry don't actually know how to hire software engineers, and we're all just making it up. And I think that imperfect mapping between like years of doing a thing and actual ability in doing it is very symptomatic of that. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and telling us your story. It's lovely to be able to this early in both like Raise.dev existing and also doing the show to be able to say, have someone on who's been through Raise and be like, hey, we keep talking about this thing. Here is someone who's done it. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
So I've got to do a little bit of wrap up, so I will take you off the screen. But thank you very much. Thank you for chat, for watching and for being here with us. And thank you, Ching.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Joe. That was fun.
Bye. Hello, everyone. Cool. Thank you so much for watching. So this was our second Hacktoberfest Help Desk of the day. We'll be back with a third edition later on this evening. That's 10 p.m. CEST for me here in Amsterdam. Or if you are in the US, that is 4 p.m. EDT. So that is in about 5 hours from now. Our guest tonight is going to be Will Russell, who is currently a community manager on the MLH Fellowship, but also wears lots of other hats. He organized a big hackathon at the beginning of COVID called Hack Quarantine. He is part of a developer-focused live stream setup called Hack Productions. So I'm looking forward for him telling me why my live stream is garbage. It's going to be great. We're going to talk about Discord bots and have some fun there. So that'll be happening later on. If you, as I said, this channel, what we're here to do is help you with Hacktoberfest. And we want to answer all your questions, big or small, high level or down in the details. If you have those questions, not only can you jump into the chat here and ask us live, you can drop those into our help desk submission form at raise.dev/Hacktoberfest. If you want to see the schedule we have coming up for you, you can find that over on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv, Raise.dev's schedule. That schedule gets updated basically as soon as Twitch lets us do it. Only lets you show a week at a time. So I'll be getting the new shows for next week up there soon. But to give you a sneak peek of some of our guests next week, we have Florian Dries from Microsoft joining us on Monday, along with Brian Douglas and Nick from the Dev project. Ching mentioned Dev about a meetup there in their office. Dev is, if you haven't seen it, it's a really cool community that is like sharing content and giving each other advice and that kind of thing. They run their community on a product they've recently spun out called Forum. I'm really excited about it personally because as someone who does developer communities for a living, I've been very frustrated by the lack of platforms, really. Like it's hard to run a developer community nowadays because none of the options really tick all the boxes. So I'm very excited about Forum, and Nick and the Forum team will be live on the show doing some issues and pull requests on Forum itself. So that's going to be really exciting, a little bit of live coding. We've got Andrew Seward from Tech Nottingham. That's the town I did university in, and we're going to chat about tech communities and the communities around projects. We've got Flacky from all kinds of things, but involved in lots of Mozilla projects. We've got Sean and Matthew from Microsoft. We've got a lot of Microsoft people on next week, actually. That's going to be great. And we've also got Chris Hunt, who I did see here in the audience. I don't know if you're still around, Chris. So we have some great guests on next week, and we will be announcing those as soon as we are able to. You can also find, as well as on the Twitch schedule, you can find all of our events. Hey, Chris, thanks for jumping in chat. You'll be able to find all of our streams as events on the Hacktoberfest website. Hopefully within a couple of hours, I will be getting those up there for you to be able to RSVP there as well. So just a final reminder, as well as providing this help desk to you, the reason we're doing this help desk throughout October is because we here at Raise.dev care deeply about helping you take the next step in your career, whether you're finding your first development job, making a career transition, trying to get a promotion, or trying to complete a project. We are here to help with our expert coaches. Some of those coaches will be on and off the show throughout the month, and you can sign up now whilst we're in early access for free to have some time with our coaches. You'll get a kickoff call, and then they'll walk through how to advance your career. We've had since we launched on Tuesday, the coaches have been doing a whole heap of calls, and some of the things I've been picking up on Slack have been very exciting indeed. Sounds like the community is going to be full of wonderful people, so that's very exciting. So that is all from us for this episode. We will be back. We're going to call these episodes? Yeah, why not? We're a series now. These are episodes. We'll be back later on tonight in about 4 hours. You can catch that on our Twitter or on Twitch if you're following us. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I'm not very good at this whole like and subscribe thing. But if you want notifications, you can get a daily notification of who we've got on live from the Hacktoberfest page. So Raise.dev Hacktoberfest, there's a little form at the top where you can subscribe, and we will send you an email every day with who's coming up that day. And also, if you follow us on Twitch, I think Twitch have done the YouTube thing now where doing a follow isn't enough. You also have to go and find like an extra bell to tick to get the notifications, because someone told me yesterday they weren't getting those. But if you do want notifications from Twitch that we are live, you can do it there. And finally, you can also follow us at Raise.dev. So we tweet out half-an-hour warnings before we go live. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And for those of you who join us later on, we'll see you then.